Have you ever felt like the world around you is filled with love, yet somehow you're standing outside, feeling as though it has passed you by? We all carry the weight of these moments, the times when we wonder if we are truly seen, heard, or loved for who we are. But what if the root of this feeling isn't in the world outside, but within ourselves? What if the key to healing this ache lies not in seeking love from others, but in learning how to love the one person who can change everything, ourselves? Feelings of being unloved are often treated as surface-level emotions, the result of external rejection or lack of attention from others. But these emotions run much deeper, often rooted in the unconscious mind, in what depth psychology refers to as the shadow self. The shadow is not inherently evil or dark. It simply represents the parts of ourselves that we have rejected, denied, or repressed because they were not accepted by our caregivers, our culture, or our conscious self, Pimi. When we feel unloved, it is not always because love is absent from our external world. More often, it's because something within us has been cast out of the light of our awareness. We've turned away from parts of ourselves we deemed unworthy, our vulnerability, our anger, our neediness, our sadness. And these parts now live in the shadow. The unloved feeling arises when these disowned parts begin to stir. They knock at the door of consciousness not to be exiled again, but to be recognized, felt, and integrated. Imagine a child whose true emotions were dismissed. Perhaps they were told, "Don't cry," or "Be strong," or "That's nothing to be upset about." The child learns quickly that love and acceptance come at the cost of authenticity. They split. They show only what pleases others and bury the rest. Years later, this split still exists within them. The adult may be successful, admired, even surrounded by people, yet a haunting feeling persists. No one truly loves me. That's not because no one does. It's because the individual is not whole. The shadow has become a silent wall between the self and others. Exploring the shadow self is not a comfortable task. It requires radical honesty and emotional courage. One must look at the traits in others that trigger disgust, envy, or judgment, and ask, what in me is responding this way? The world becomes a mirror, revealing the pieces of ourselves we've tried to bury. Each judgment, each aversion, each emotional wound is an entry point into the shadow, and in each of these there is a key to understanding why we feel unloved, not just by others, but by ourselves. As long as we continue to deny the existence of our shadow, we unconsciously live under its power. We may become perfectionists, overachievers, or eternal caretakers, always trying to earn the love we believe we don't deserve. Or we may sabotage intimacy, avoid vulnerability, or lash out when others get too close, all out of fear that if they saw the real us, they would leave. But the one doing the leaving is not them, it is us. We have abandoned the rejected parts within ourselves. We have refused to love our own shadow. Exploring the shadow is not about self-blame. It's about self-integration. The unloved feeling is a signal, a voice from within saying, there is more of you waiting to be known. That voice is not a curse. It is a summons, a calling to turn inward, to embrace all that you are, not just the acceptable or the polished, but the messy, the raw, and the hidden. Only then can the feeling of being unloved begin to dissolve, not because others suddenly change, but because you have chosen to see yourself, all of yourself, and offer love where there was once rejection. The experience of feeling unloved is often intensified by the psychological mechanism known as projection. Projection occurs when an individual unconsciously attributes their own inner experiences, beliefs, or feelings onto others. In this context, It means that what one believes others feel about them, such as indifference, rejection, or disinterest, is often a reflection of how they secretly feel about themselves. The mind, when burdened with self-doubt or internalized shame, seeks external confirmation of those hidden beliefs. It turns inward pain outward, perceiving it in the eyes, words, or actions of others, even when no such judgment exists. At the core of this phenomenon is the idea that we rarely see others as they are. We see them as we are. If a person carries an inner narrative of being unworthy of love, perhaps rooted in early experiences where love was conditional, absent, or inconsistent, they are more likely to interpret neutral social cues as signs of rejection. A delayed text message, a forgotten invitation, or a simple lack of attention can become magnified. The psyche does not merely process these events objectively, it filters them through deeply held, often unconscious beliefs that say, "I am not lovable," or "people always leave me." The danger of projection is that it creates a feedback loop. You feel unloved because you internally reject yourself. You then interpret others' actions through this lens of rejection, and in doing so, you act in ways that either push people away or confirm your beliefs. For example, someone who fears being unlovable might withdraw emotionally, testing others by pulling back to see if they'll change. When others don't respond the way they hoped, it becomes evidence of unlovability. Yet, what really happened is that their own fear set a stage that others could only react to, not understand. Projection distorts not only relationships with others, but also the relationship with the self. When we believe the problem is out there, that others are cold, cruel, or uninterested, we disown the part of ourselves that actually needs the most attention. We begin to chase validation, affection, or acknowledgement from others while continuing to deny it to ourselves. The tragedy here is that no external validation can ever permanently heal what is essentially an internal wound. Others can show love, but if one is unconsciously committed to the belief that they are unlovable, that love will either go unnoticed or be discredited. To recognize projection, one must start noticing the emotional charge behind their reactions. If someone's comment or behavior triggers an intense emotional response, particularly feelings of being unloved or unworthy, it's likely that the reaction is less about them and more about an internal belief system. This kind of introspection is not easy, as it requires stepping out of the victim narrative and taking responsibility for one's interpretations and emotional responses. It also means becoming aware of the stories we tell ourselves about others and asking, is this true? Or is this a mirror of something I believe about myself? By gradually becoming conscious of these projections, we start reclaiming parts of ourselves that were previously disowned. We stop demanding that others prove our worth to us, and instead begin to cultivate that worth from within. It's a subtle but transformative shift from looking out into the world for signs of love to looking inward for the places where we have withheld love from ourselves. The feeling of being unloved often stems from a deep disconnection from the true self. Most people go through life trying to fulfill expectations, those of family, society, or their own internalized ideals. In this effort, they may wear masks, act out roles, and become skilled at performing versions of themselves that are palatable to the world. But underneath these layers, the authentic self waits patiently, often unheard and unseen. The process of returning to that self, of becoming whole by integrating all aspects of who we are, is what depth psychology refers to as individuation. This is not merely a therapeutic idea. It is a spiritual and psychological necessity for those who wish to feel truly alive and truly loved. Individuation is not about becoming someone new. It is about uncovering what has always been there but has been hidden, rejected, or buried. It is a journey inward, toward the center of the self, where the conscious and the unconscious meet. For someone who feels unloved, this journey is crucial because what they are often seeking outside of themselves, validation, affection, attention, is actually a reflection of an internal void. They're not just missing the presence of others, they are missing their own presence. They are estranged from themselves. When one begins the path of individuation, they start to encounter all the pieces of their being, the parts they like and the parts they don't. They come face to face with their shadow, their childhood wounds, their hidden desires, their unacknowledged fears. It is a humbling experience. It demands honesty, vulnerability, and the willingness to sit in the discomfort of one's own complexity. But it is through this very confrontation that healing begins. As one integrates these pieces, they begin to feel a sense of inner unity, a peace that does not depend on how others treat them or what others think of them. The unloved feeling loses its grip when one is no longer fragmented. As long as we remain divided within ourselves, loving some parts and hating others, we remain dependent on the external world to give us a sense of completeness. But when we recognize that every aspect of ourselves has value and meaning, even the broken or painful parts, we start to feel whole, and wholeness generates a kind of love that is not based on performance or approval. It is a love that says, "I see you entirely, and I still choose you." This inner integration has another effect. It changes how we relate to others. When we are not desperately seeking love outside of ourselves, we can begin to truly give it, not out of need or desperation, but from abundance. We can allow others to be who they are because we have allowed ourselves to be who we are. This is the essence of real connection. Not two masks interacting, but two authentic beings meeting in truth. The path of individuation is not a linear or quick process. It requires time, self-reflection, and often solitude. But each step taken inwards is a step away from the illusion that love must be earned from others. It is a step toward the realization that love, in its truest form, arises from the union of all that we are. The light, the shadow, the joy, the pain. Only from that union can the ache of being unloved begin to transform into the fullness of being whole. When a person feels unloved, the source of that feeling is often not in the present moment, but rooted in the past, specifically in early childhood experiences. During our earliest years, our emotional blueprint is formed. We learn what love looks like, feels like, and how it is given or withheld. If a child grows up in an environment where love was conditional, inconsistent, or entirely absent, they internalize messages about their own worth and lovability. These messages become embedded in the psyche, not as memories we can easily access, but as unconscious beliefs that shape how we relate to others and ourselves for the rest of our lives. The inner child is not just a poetic concept. It is a psychological reality. It represents the part of us that holds our earliest emotions, wounds, and unmet needs. When someone feels unloved as an adult, it is often this inner child who is hurting, whose needs were never properly met, who still longs to be seen, soothed, and accepted. The adult self may be logical, composed, and outwardly functional, but beneath that surface, the child within may still be crying out, "Am I enough? Will you leave me? Do I matter?" To heal the sense of being unloved, one must make contact with this child, not as a memory, but as a living presence within the psyche. This requires slowing down and turning inward. One must begin to notice when overwhelming emotions arise, feelings of abandonment, rejection, or intense loneliness, and ask, who inside me is feeling this? Often it is not the adult, but the child, reliving old wounds through present-day experience. The key is not to silence these feelings, but to give them a voice, to allow the inner child to express the pain it was never allowed to share. This inner work is delicate. The inner child does not respond to intellectual reasoning or adult solutions. It needs empathy, patience, and unconditional acceptance. When the inner child is met with harsh self-talk or emotional suppression, it retreats further into isolation. But when it is acknowledged, when one says inwardly, "I hear you, I'm here, you're safe now," something profound begins to shift. The child no longer has to carry the burden alone. The adult self becomes the caretaker that was missing all those years ago. Often, people seek romantic relationships, friendships, or approval in hopes of soothing this inner pain, but no one else can fulfill the role of reparenting the inner child. Even if others offer genuine love, the inner child may be too wounded to trust or receive it. This is why some people find themselves sabotaging closeness, pushing away love, or settling for relationships that mirror the original wounds. They are not trying to suffer, they are repeating what is familiar, reenacting the past in hopes of a different outcome. But true healing does not come through repetition. It comes through conscious intervention. Reconnecting with the inner child means making time for reflection, creativity, play, and emotion. It means honoring vulnerability instead of shaming it. It means letting go of the idea that being strong means being unaffected. True strength comes from meeting the most tender parts of ourselves with compassion and care. The journey toward feeling loved does not begin with finding someone else to love us. It begins with learning how to love the part of us that once believed it was unlovable. The inner child does not need to be fixed. It needs to be felt, held, and finally welcomed home. The human tendency to measure self-worth through external validation is one of the most pervasive traps of the modern psyche. From early life, people are conditioned to believe that their value is determined by how others see them. Whether through praise, approval, popularity, or recognition, the idea is planted that love must be earned through performance or perfection. As a result, the search for love becomes entangled with a constant need for validation, and the absence of external affirmation often triggers the painful belief, "I am unloved because I am not enough." This belief is dangerous because it ties one's emotional reality to factors beyond personal control. If others are warm, we feel secure. If they are indifferent or critical, we feel worthless. This dynamic creates an unstable emotional foundation where self-worth rises and falls with the opinions and behaviors of those around us. It leads to chronic insecurity, people-pleasing, self-abandonment, and emotional dependence. The true self becomes buried beneath the need to be liked, accepted, or seen in a certain light. And the feeling of being unloved takes root whenever those external mirrors stop reflecting approval. What is often misunderstood is that the desire for love is not wrong, it is deeply human. But the confusion lies in thinking that love must come from others to be real. In truth, the foundation of all lasting love is inner validation. This is not a vague concept of self-esteem or positive thinking. It is a profound inner stance, one that says, "I see myself, I accept myself, I recognize my worth, even when no one else does." This kind of self-recognition is not narcissistic. It is necessary. Without it, every compliment becomes a drug, every rejection a wound, and every silence a threat. Learning to validate oneself is a process of reorienting the inner compass. It begins by recognizing the inner critic, the voice that says you must be smarter, prettier, more successful, more agreeable to be worthy of love. This voice is not your enemy, but it is also not your truth. It is often the internalized voice of caregivers, society, or culture. It must be witnessed and then gradually replaced with an inner voice rooted in compassion, authenticity, and truth. This means beginning to say things to yourself that you once longed to hear from others. I am proud of you. You did enough. You are lovable just as you are. This practice can feel awkward at first, especially if the habit of external validation has been long-standing, but over time, it creates a shift in the psyche. Instead of living in reaction to the world, you begin to live from a stable center. You become less dependent on others for a sense of worth and more capable of forming relationships that are mutual, not transactional. You give love without needing it to be returned in a specific form. You receive love without questioning whether you deserve it. You become whole, and from that wholeness, the feeling of being unloved begins to dissolve, not because people start treating you differently, but because you no longer use their treatment as the measuring stick of your own value. When self-degradation becomes a lived reality, you are no longer at the mercy of others' opinions, moods, or choices. Love, then, is no longer something you chase or beg for. It becomes the natural expression of who you are, rooted, steady, and already enough. Solitude, though often mistaken for loneliness, is one of the most potent states of being for inner transformation. When someone feels unloved, the first instinct is usually to seek out the presence of others, to fill the silence, to distract from the pain, to affirm one's worth through connection. But this impulse, while understandable, can become a cycle that prevents true healing. The feeling of being unloved is not merely an emotional reaction. It is an invitation from the soul to turn inward, and solitude is the space in which this inward turning becomes possible. It is in solitude that the unconscious begins to speak, that the soul begins to stir, and that one begins to remember the deeper truths that cannot be heard in the noise of constant interaction. Many people fear solitude because in that space, the voices within grow louder. The doubts, the unresolved grief, the fears of abandonment, the ache of past wounds, they all begin to surface when the distractions fall away. But these voices are not enemies, they are parts of the self that have been silenced, waiting to be acknowledged. When someone sits alone with their pain and resists the urge to escape it, they begin to witness something profound. The pain does not destroy them. In fact, it begins to soften. It begins to reveal its source. It begins to show them what they truly need, not superficial comfort, but deep, inner reconciliation. The person who learns to be alone without fear becomes powerful, not in the sense of dominance, but in the sense of wholeness. They no longer rely on the world to validate their existence. They learn to enjoy their own company. They begin to cultivate inner stillness, which is the ground of all true insight. In this stillness, one can begin to ask meaningful questions. Why do I believe I am unlovable? Where did this belief begin? What am I trying to get from others that I refuse to give myself? These questions are not easily answered, but solitude provides the container in which they can be explored without judgment, without performance, and without the need to impress. Solitude is also where creativity is born. The soul, when left undisturbed, begins to imagine, to dream, to express. Whether through writing, music, art, movement, or silent reflection, the individual begins to connect with something greater than the personal wound, a deeper rhythm, an inner essence, something eternal. It is here that one begins to sense that they are not just a personality defined by rejection or acceptance, but a being of depth, of mystery, of value beyond measure. This connection with the deeper self is what begins to dispel the illusion of being unloved. To be alone and at peace with oneself is to become whole. It does not mean cutting oneself off from others, but rather coming to relationships from a place of fullness rather than lack. When you are no longer desperate for love, you can recognize it when it is real. You can receive it without clinging, and you can give it without fear. The solitude that once felt empty becomes sacred. It becomes the place where you meet your truest self, the part of you that has always been lovable, not because of what you do or how others respond, but because you are. The journey from feeling unloved to embracing the love we all inherently deserve is not one of searching for approval, perfection, or external validation. It is a path inward, a process of reconnecting with our deepest, most authentic selves. When we face the shadow of our own inner pain, stop projecting our fears onto others, embrace our wholeness, and learn to validate ourselves. We begin to uncover the love that has always been waiting inside. The feeling of being unloved is not a reflection of reality. It is a signal that we have not yet learned to love ourselves fully. Through solitude, self-awareness, and self-compassion, we can begin to heal the wounds of the past and find the deep, unconditional love that resides within us. Only when we choose to love ourselves can we open the door to the love we have always deserved.